to just kind of go through some housekeeping issues while everybody joins. So first and foremost, this is our last webinar of the school year. We have been hosting them since October, and we're going to take some downtime and ramp up for our Idaho After School Summit, which is August 26th. So we'll be really focused on building up some in-person trainings. We'd love to have you attend that. Registration will be open for that this week, so stay posted. Also, if you are having some withdrawals and you've really become addicted to our webinars, all of them are recorded and available on our website, so please go to our website, idahoafterschool.org, and you can register to participate in any of them. They're all recorded along with all of the materials that we mentioned during the webinar. You will notice if you happen to go there today, it is a little messy. We are reorganizing that page. We've just been dumping tons of information into it this year. And we need to reorganize it, and so that'll be done this week as well. And helping me do that this week are our two new Vistas, and I want to introduce you to them. We have Michelle Cushing, who will be up north. She is now doing some boot camp training with us. And then we also have Emily Smith, who will be down here in Boise, Idaho, and helping run all of our communication and development for us. So they are joined with me today. So we also have with us a special guest, Erin Romans, who is the Executive Director of Motivate Youth. I caught wind of this training through the National After School Association, and they had rated Erin's breakout sessions as one of the top breakout sessions in the nation. So I was really intrigued. I did a little bit of digging. I reached out to Erin and I said, hey, how about you start getting some of this information here in Idaho, and we'll start with a webinar and see what the feedback is, and then maybe there will be an opportunity to invite Erin to come to our summit in August. So to help us gauge whether this information is valuable to you today, we will also be sending out a survey after this webinar along with the recording. So if you need to get up and leave, feel free to do so, and you can come and left off. But please take some time to fill out that survey and let us know what you think. We always are improving and engaged, and we want to know what works and what isn't working, so please let us know. So it looks like we've got a good number of people coming in today, and I'm going to turn the time over to Erin. Erin, if you want to talk a little bit, you've got an amazing resume. It's interesting how you landed leading a nonprofit about motivating youth intrinsically, so I would love to hear your story if you want to share that with everyone. Oh, also, really quick, in the chat box, if you guys want to ask any questions, I will unmute us when we have a Q&A period, and you can just talk like I'm doing right now, or you can also, when you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We will be monitoring that and reading those questions. So a webinar is really designed to be interactive, so if you have questions, if you have any points of clarification, please use this tool. That's the advantage of attending a webinar live. And you may have a question that somebody else down the road who's watching this in the future doesn't have the opportunity to ask. So please don't be shy. Ask your questions. It's why we do them the way that we do it. So Erin, I am now going to turn the time over to you. Oh, Erin, let me unmute you. Hold on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Terrific. All right, terrific. Thank you very much. I'm going to pull up the first slide and get things going. Let's see here. I'll do this. All right, do you see that? Or is that not up yet? Hold on. Let's try this. Share screen.
Okay, you're live. We see it.
How does that look? Does that look good?
Looks good.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much. And thank you for reaching out to me and everybody who's attending this webinar. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. I'm the executive director of Motivate Youth. We're a small nonprofit. We're based out of Madison. And one of the big things that we do is that we give presentations, either over the internet or in person, about motivational interviewing. And they can be very long and they can be very short, or anywhere in between. And they really sort of target a lot of different needs that after school programs are looking for, especially with motivation. And a little bit later into this presentation, I'll kind of get into how I discovered MI and kind of why I'm doing this. But just a little background on myself. I've been working with youth for 7 or 8 years now, here in Madison, also in South America, in Ecuador, working with kids in a school down there, and then in Pittsburgh, in inner city Pittsburgh. It was there that I actually kind of discovered motivational interviewing and how it could work with after school programs. So this is just an introduction to it. It's based on the essentially motivational interviewing manual, and then consulting my wife and other psychologists, essentially to make sure that we're getting it right and that we're still applying it correctly for after school needs. So with that, let me just tell you a bit about what's going to be in this talk. Hopefully the talk part of it, outside of the questions, we limit it to about a half hour. And half of it is going to be like things to try. So stuff that you can just do right away, just a couple little tips, a little ways of having conversations will hopefully increase motivation, or at least increase engagement in your program. The other half is just an overview. This is, like I said, a very brief introduction. It's just supposed to essentially put motivational interviewing sort of on your radar, as maybe this is something that would be good to do in after school. So we're going to split it that way. You might see me, I kind of explained this earlier, looking up like this every now and then. I'm not looking to the heavens for answers. This is, my monitor is actually up here. So this is why I'm kind of going back and forth. But with that, what you'll also see in this presentation are some videos. So you're going to see me, I guess, wearing different clothes in a different setting, sort of demonstrating or talking about in practice how MI works. And this first one is just essentially an introduction video. So I'm going to cue that one up now. Here we go. Hi, I'm Marion with Motivate Youth, and let me tell you a story about Ernest. Ernest was a 7th grader and a regular attender of an after-school program in Pittsburgh. This is a program that I taught, and it was a typical after-school program. It mixed a lot of academic work and homework help with a lot of enrichment stuff and a lot of fun stuff. And so it's pretty well attended, and Ernest was pretty typical in the program, as if he was there for a lot of fun stuff and maybe didn't like the academic work so much. And this story happened during homework help, which is a typical after-school program where the kids come in to bring their homework and tutors are there to help them out. If you didn't supplemental work, which is an extra worksheet for the student to do, and it was something to sort of occupy their time and maybe get them thinking, and it usually is something they like. On this particular day in after school, Ernest was clearly not interested in doing any work at all. He's been like this before, and I've seen all the signs. Slouched, afraid to touch the desk like it's poison, legs apart, arms down to their side, heads down, no books, no backpack, no paper, no pencil, nothing. He was just going to sit it out. And so I decided to approach Ernest and ask him, if he wanted to do the supplemental worksheet. So I have the worksheet for him. It's a science worksheet. It's mostly reading with a few questions at the end, and it's about space travel. I know Ernest is interested in space, so I thought maybe he'd go for it. I set the worksheet down on the desk in front of him. He, with one finger, puts it away. Oh, you dropped this, Ernest, I say. And I pick it up and put it back on. Puts it away again. No, Mr. Aaron, I'm not doing any work today. I just don't feel like it. I say, well, but these are the rules. This is what you have to do, right? You come in, you do the worksheet, you get done, and you get to go have fun, get a snack. No, Mr. Aaron, I'm not going to do the worksheet today. There's a lot of things you can do in this situation. You can tell them about how great the worksheet is, how the enrichment part of the program is really important. You can spend a lot of time talking about how you're going to take a quick snack or recess time. But I saw that none of that was really going to work today. So I went right to my last resort, negotiation. Ernest, I'd say, how about you only read 2 paragraphs and then answer the question? No, Mr. Aaron, I'm not going to do that. 1 paragraph? No. Okay. So how about this? You don't have to read anything except the question. This is my last chance of getting him to do anything. So just read the questions and tell me which question do you find most interesting and why. You don't have to write anything down. You just have to tell me. So I'll let him do it. He read through the questions. He said he found the third one the most interesting. It was about colonizing Mars. So I asked him, why did you find that interesting? And Mars, how he would like to live there. And it was clear that he had thought about this before. Great, I said. That's fantastic. He showed some thought. He did some work. I was happy. So I said, great, you're free to go. Go get your snack. And I got occupied by something else. 5 minutes later, I look back and I find out that Ernest had gone back and read the entire worksheet and filled out all the questions. He didn't have to do the work, but he did it anyway. Why? Why did he do that work? Well, I had stumbled into something. You see, by opening up the dialogue and letting him be in charge of what he wanted to learn, I activated his intrinsic motivation. That is, I made him want to learn about something because he wanted to learn about it, not because of any external punishments or rewards that were coming his way or any argument that I made. He started talking about science, he got excited, and then he wanted to read about it. Intrinsic motivation is the key to engagement, and it's activated through good conversation and great listening skills. Okay, and with that,
Hey, Aaron, this
Yeah.
is Marie really quick. There were some people who had a little hard time hearing that. That was an awesome story. I kind of caught waves. But can you just really quickly recap your experience with Ernest, just so that
Sure.
people, thank you. I'm so sorry that didn't come through well.
Yeah, and I could maybe turn up the volume on my end or something to make it come through more. I'm not sure exactly. Because
Yes,
there'll be
maybe if you have another one, turn up the volume as loud as you can. I've got it turned up on my end pretty loud.
Sure.
And sometimes I could catch it and sometimes I couldn't. It was kind of in and out, and I really am sorry about that. But I really want to make sure that our viewers have the story of Ernest if they weren't able to hear that.
Okay, sure. So essentially, just the same thing that just to recap what happened in that video. What ended up happening is I had a student that didn't want to do any work, and he has his days that he does and his days that he doesn't. What ended up happening there specifically is, instead of trying to reward him for doing the work by giving him, a snack or some sort of bonus, or by threatening punishments like that he couldn't go outside or not do anything, what I did is I just sort of said, you don't have to read it, you don't have to do anything, just read some of the questions and tell me which question you find more interesting. We'll just talk about it. And he found one, and we talked about it, and that got him really interested in it. And then he went back and he actually read the whole worksheet and he answered the rest of the questions. And he did that on his own because he was intrinsically motivated. And that's what we're really talking about today, is how do you grow that intrinsic motivation? That's what motivational interviewing is all about. To put it simply, motivational interviewing is just simply a really good conversation. The idea is a really good conversation can motivate anyone. But these conversations, they don't have to happen by accident. There are ways that you can ask the right questions and give the right responses that allow space for these motivating conversations to take place. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that today. First, let's talk about what is a productive conversation. So the first part is active or reflective listening. A lot of you have probably heard of reflective listening before. It is super important and a big part of what makes motivational interviewing work. And it's just a really great listening habit to have no matter what. I'll go a little bit over what reflective listening is a little bit later on for those of you who might not know. The second is that's great in a good conversation is a lot of positive talk. That's just talking about the good times, about what's good, and not meditating on what's negative or what's bad. And then finally, there's an effort towards mutual understanding. The idea is everybody's just trying to figure out where everybody else is coming from, more so than trying to share or incite a specific point of view. In the opposite direction, what's a bad conversation? What's anti-productive? The first one is argument, and this is even civil argument. And I'll explain, there'll be a video a little bit later on that really demonstrates why argument can be not productive. But essentially, the idea is that we don't really change minds through argument. The second is, well, the opposite of positive talk. This would be like negative talk, venting. Venting feels good. A friend of mine who's a psychologist said that nothing in the world of psychology has set us back more than the notion that venting is somehow productive. It's really not. Essentially what happens when people vent is that they start to exaggerate their own feelings, their own negative attitudes, and things feel worse than they even are. So while it might feel real good in the short term to get it out, in the long term, it can make you feel worse than you started. And then finally, efforts towards convincing. So this is sort of the opposite of mutual understanding. Convincing is not trying to see someone else's point of view, but trying to make them see yours. And those efforts generally go nowhere, and they lead to a lot of hostility. So these aren't good parts of a productive conversation. And the real reason for that is because of how talk affects motivation. It's this really simple premise. It's something that's been demonstrated a lot in psychology. And what it is that when we say something enough, we really believe in it. We start to believe in it. No matter what it is, the more we say it, the more we believe it. This has actually sort of been a part of human history. It's the reason why we have songs and pledges and things where we recite stuff. It's a part of meditation. And it's well documented in psychology today that no matter what you're saying, you might not believe it at first, but the more you say it, the more you're going to believe it. And that's whether it's good or bad. So what we believe in then can fuel our intrinsic motivation. That's because when we start to believe it, we start to think that's a part of who we are. If I say that I am a person who is gifted in mathematics, let's say, if I say that enough, I really am going to start to believe it about myself. And that is a huge confidence builder. That really does change. If I start to say that I'm a good person, to be really basic about it, if I say that I'm a good person enough, I'm going to feel like I'm a good person. And if I say that I'm a bad person enough, I'm going to feel like a bad person. And so when you start feeling that way, you start to act on it. And this is the final step of that, which is purpose. This is to say that when we feel, so we say something enough, we start to believe in it. When we believe in it, we start to feel that is who we are, and that starts to give us purpose. Purpose is important for people who are, I don't know, maybe learning about things like grit and other qualities that we are really looking for in our students. Essentially, for them to be able to have these qualities, they need to have a real sense of purpose. Essentially, they have to feel that I'm a person who perseveres past difficult times because that is who I am. Not because of what somebody tells me to do, not because I get rewarded for it. It's just because that's who I am. That is the most powerful motivator that human beings have. To keep moving along then, so if we accept this premise, we can start to talk about how motivational interviewing works to grow that intrinsic motivation, essentially to give our students a positive purpose. The key is that we can't tell anybody how to be motivated. And this is always something that I have that's a little maybe, it's a common thing that when people talk about grit or other qualities that we want our students to have, we basically say, well, you can't just tell them to be that way. Be more gritty. That doesn't really work. Students are like, what does that mean? And you can explain it. You can sort of talk about what it is, but you can't just tell them to do it. You can't tell them to be more motivated. You can't just say, you need to work harder. Instead, they need to tell us. They need to tell us that they're gritty. They need to tell us that they want to work harder. They need to tell us that they want to engage in the program and that they want to attend more, that anything that really is part of that common goal, they need to tell us that part of it. And so motivational interviewing, that's where the interviewing comes in, is that it's not us telling them what to do. It's us asking the right questions and listening the right way to make sure that they're telling us these things. Remember, because when they tell us, they're going to hear themselves say it, and they're really going to start to believe in it. So the basic definition of motivational interviewing is a collaborative conversation that strengthens a person's own motivation and commitment to change. This is the layman's definition of motivational interviewing, and as what you can see it, no matter how you define it, it's essentially just a really good conversation that leaves anyone motivated. So in this, there's going to be an interviewer, that is the person who's asking questions, and an interviewee. In our case, is going to be the student or the after-school attendee. And let's break down a little bit then in this conversation what the interviewer says and how much should they say it. Well, a first part of this is open-ended questions. A lot of you have probably heard what open-ended questions are. They are questions that just can't be answered in yes or no. They actually need some talking. This kind of makes sense because if we need to get the students to start telling us how they want to be hard workers, how they want to change, how they want to be attend more, be better students, they actually need to say those words. They just can't say, yes, I will. They need to say it, and they need to hear themselves saying it. So open questions is a big part of that. Not just yes or no questions. And I'm going to throw one thing out with the questions too. Another question question word that I like to avoid is why. Why is technically an open question, because you are looking for an explanation. But it really turns kids away from having a discussion with you when you ask why. And I think the reason for that is because too often we say why, but we don't actually really want an answer. Like, why are you running? Or why are you talking? These aren't questions that are looking for explanations. Instead, they are just commands. So we're trying to avoid that and ask questions where we really want to hear a detailed answer. The next part of this is affirmation. Affirmation is simply reinforcing the idea that when they say something like, I'm a hard worker, that you say, yes, you are a hard worker. It's basically letting them know the positive aspects of them, no matter who they are. Now, sometimes those aspects are in a way where it's like a student will say, well, I don't want to change I don't want to change my mind, you know, like, and you might say, well, you are stubborn. And stubborn isn't necessarily affirmative, but you can say is sort of, you are very convicted. You have convictions. And that is an affirmation. And that is a positive note. And so no matter what the student is telling us, we want to find ways to affirm them positively. Now, the next one is the big chunk. This is reflected listening. You can see it's over half of the conversation is actually not asking questions at all. It's rather when the student says something that you're going to reflect that back. The reason why you do this in motivational interviewing is sometimes it's not enough just for the student to say it out loud. When they hear you reflect it back to them, that's like they heard it twice. They say, you know what, I'm a hard worker, and that's why I'm going to finish my math homework. You want to say that back to them, like, yes, you're going to finish your math homework because nothing stops you. You work hard, you know, every day. And so what we want to do is find those moments where the student is saying something positive about themselves, and every time reflect it back to them. Make sure that we not only hear it, but that we're giving them a receipt, that we're letting them know that we heard that about them, because that just doubly reinforces it within them. And then finally, the last part that an interviewer would say in these conversations is a summary. And the summary is a lot of times in these conversations, students will say things that have nothing to do with maybe your shared goal, what you're talking about, nothing to do with attending after school more or participating more or doing their homework during homework time. A lot of times the conversation is about whatever. The idea is you don't want to reflect all of that back because that's just a huge, you know, that'll take up a lot of time. But what you should at least do is just acknowledge still that you heard it. So say, no, that's great. Like, I'm sure you have lots of fun playing video games at home, and it's great that you told me about it. But let's talk about the homework a little bit right now. It's just a way to sort of focus the conversation back. So, like I said, this is just sort of an overview of what a conversation looks like in MI. And coming up, what we'll talk about a little more specifically is how you can have some specific conversations for specific goals. But this is what an overall conversation looks like. What I really want to point out is what's not up there, what's not motivating. One thing that I'll really point out is that there's no advice. As adults, I feel like we feel compelled to give advice. Like we have that like golden nugget of information that could maybe change a child's life. The problem is we do, but unless a child is ready to hear it, they're not going to pay attention and they're not going to take that advice. And so it's important to have those stories, but no advice unless the child asks for it specifically. And if you have a good relationship, they will ask for advice, and then that's the opportunity to give it. But otherwise, you're just kind of wasting your time telling stories that quite possibly the student isn't interested in. So there's no advice. There's not a lot of talking about yourself. There's very little of your own opinion in it. And that's because in the idea of motivational interviewing, your opinion doesn't really matter that much. You're not trying to convince them of anything. You're not trying to say, my opinion should be your opinion, but rather you're just trying to understand each other and then focus on the positive aspects of that conversation. So with that, a couple of things about how these conversations sort of work. Now, you don't have to be doing MI all the time. And in fact, in group settings, it doesn't work that well. It works best to have these 5 to 10 minute conversations, one-on-one, free from distraction. When you can do them one-on-one, just 5 minutes every now and then, just have a conversation where you're giving them your full attention. It's much more productive than trying to do it in a situation where you don't have that. And then the second part is when to use it. Like I said, you don't want to use it all the time. So you want to use it mostly when we have something called ambivalence. That is something where we're trying to resolve a choice between two options. A student might have two things that they're trying to do. The way that you really recognize them is you look for the but in that sentence. So here's what it kind of looks like. One motivation, but, and then there's a second motivation, which is to say, let's say, I want to get good grades, but the homework really isn't helping me. Or I want to get my math homework done, but I'd rather play video games. In fact, we all have these in our lives. This is the most probably popular one. I want to exercise, but I don't have the time. I think we always, a lot of us are facing that, or we want to do something else, but we don't have the time or don't have the energy, or this is just who we are. And so when that's happening, what that means is you're going to have a conversation where there's some positive things like exercise, but some negative things like being really busy. So let's, the idea is you have this conversation and you focus on the positive stuff and reflect that more. And you kind of move past the negative stuff. That's essentially a summary of what MI looks like in a typical conversation. Now, what I want to show you here is another video. I'm going to work to figure out if I can make this louder. This is turned up all the way on my end, and we'll see if this works for you. This is an example of how you can more specifically use motivational interviewing to make it work. Actually, I think I kind of have an idea about how to try to make this work. So I'm going to play it, and then we'll see if you can hear it all better.
Aaron, just pay attention to the chat box and see.
Okay, let's see if I can see. I got. Let's see.
It'll light up, and for those of you who are listening, if you have a hard time hearing, just go ahead and let me know through the chat box.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Do you want to win an argument, or do you want to change someone's mind? Because the two things couldn't be more different. You see, when you are making an argument, what you're actually doing is putting together a lot of facts, opinions, and justifications for your cause. You spend a lot of time talking about all the things that are right with your side of the story. When you're trying to change someone's mind, you don't want to put together all that information. You want them to put together all of that information. And so the tact that you have to take is completely different. Let me show you through a demonstration. Let's take Sandra. Sandra is in middle school. Oh, sorry. She's been missing a lot of math lately. You think she's been skipping and just hanging out with her friends. So it's time to have a seat with Sandra. Sandra, you say, you've been missing a lot of math. What's been going on? And Sandra says, well, math is boring. I don't like it. And I'd much rather be spending the time with my friends. That's a much better option for me. Now, here's the pivotal moment. Do you go into argument mode? Or are we going to try to change someone's mind today? You see, argument mode means that you're going to spend a lot of time talking about all the good things in math and why math is important and why attending school is important. You're going to talk about grades, future, college. You're going to talk about why you need math in the grocery store and at your job and in your home life. You're going to put together a great case. But what's Sandra going to come back with? Well, she's going to make her best case. Why math isn't important, why it's boring, and why she doesn't have to go. She's going to tell you she already knows all the math that she needs. She's going to tell you that she's fine in the grocery store, she's fine at home, and she's not going to get a job that requires that much math anyway. She's going to tell you that right now they're learning trigonometry, and trigonometry has like no value to anyone outside of math and science people. You might have some arguments back, but at this point, what does it matter? You've cemented your side, and you're right in your mind. But what happened is she cemented her side, and she's right in her mind as well. We've gotten nowhere.
Instead of arguing, let's try to change a mind. And the first way to do that is to acknowledge that you yourself don't have the power to change minds at all. Each person changes their mind on their own. So in reality, it's up to her. But you can help her get there. You can guide her. And the way that you guide her is by starting to talk positively about things around math. For instance, as soon as she says, I don't want to go to math class, it's boring, come back with a big open question. What classes do you like in school? She'll say, art. Tell me about art. What do you like about art? And she might go on a very long story about how she enjoys painting and it's a lot of time with her friends and she gets to talk, but she gets to do some creative work at the same time. Now we've got the conversation going in a positive direction, even if it isn't about the direct issue at hand. The tricky part here is to bend it back to that issue. So you say, you like art and you go to art all the time because you can hang out with your friends. What can we do to make math feel more like art? You see what's happening here? We're now working as a team. Me and Sandra, we're going to figure this out together. I understand her problem. Math is boring and it doesn't seem relevant. We need to work together to figure out how we can make it feel more like art to her. Tell me about a time that you enjoyed a math class. What did you do? She might say, oh, I don't really have any. Keep pressing. Oh, I'm sure you have one. Just one, like a good time or a time where you were like, well, this isn't that boring. Maybe she has a story. Maybe it was a free day. Maybe they were working on some math-related project like building a kite. We're bending the conversation back to the issue at hand, math class, and we're talking positively about it. Just maybe not the most recent math classes, but other ones. Now we're ready to figure out how we can make things better in the future. What can I do to make sure that math is more interesting for you in the future? How can I help? You see, we're back on a team again, working together, solving the problem. Now, does this work every time? No. Sometimes you have just a good conversation that doesn't go anywhere. Sometimes it only plants a little seed that she thinks about later on. But the important thing is you're an ally now. You're in her corner, and she knows you're willing to help her out so that in the future, when maybe this problem continues to persist, you can continue to talk about it and work together to find a solution.
Okay, I hope you were able to hear that a little bit better.
That was much better. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. I kind of found a workaround to make it work. So with that, there's one more piece, but this is a good time to sort of break and see if there's any questions. I just threw a lot of information at you, I know, from a lot of different, just try to give you like a sort of broad perspective. But if anybody has any questions right now, you can type them out or do that. And then also at the end, there'll be one more small segment, and then at the end, I'll also take questions. But if anybody has anything right now, love questions right now.
I will encourage anyone you can unmute yourself and ask a question directly verbally, or you can go ahead and put it in the chat box. And while you do that, Aaron, I do have a question. Is there an age group that this type of interviewing is ideal for?
Well, obviously you have to match the conversation for whichever age group you're working with. I personally do it with as young as third graders. It gets a little more difficult with second, first graders, and before that. Essentially, at that age, the kids are so interested in just telling you what you want to hear, that you don't have necessarily these fully honest conversations. And to some extent, the younger kids, extrinsic motivations like rewards work really well. I really found that working with kids, because I've worked with kids essentially from first grade up, that eventually, once the kids start to get a little older, they start to care a lot less about it. So about third grade is about the youngest, and then of course, how intense the conversation is really does depend upon the age, but it works all the way up through high school, and it was originally designed for adults, so it works for adults too.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't see any other questions.
Sure.
But again, if you are still typing out a question, feel free to continue to do that. I will make sure that they get asked towards the end as well. And I'll just let you continue, Aaron.
All right, terrific. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have one more video coming up. That last one, I feel, really demonstrates what we're talking about with how you can have a positive conversation instead of a negative one, and how you can avoid argument instead of getting into an argument. Essentially, as soon as anyone starts to argue, they start to shut down. And they start to think about what they want to say next, and not so much about what you are saying. And that goes for both the adult and the student in the conversation. We don't listen as well, and they don't listen as well. So I feel like that's a good demonstration on just how that works. And this one is specifically something that I would recommend just trying right away. This is how to increase engagement. And the deal with is that we can do more than just avoid arguments. We can do more than just sort of like avoid having a bad conversation. We can actually grow engagement. We can actually grow through positive conversations. A student's desire to take part in either a program as a whole or a specific part of it. And the key is to keep that conversation positive. And this video is going to give you a demonstration on how to do that.
I'm Aaron from Motivate Youth, and I'm going to show you how you can increase engagement for your students. All it takes is a pencil. The more a student talks positively about your program, the more they're going to want to attend and the more they're going to want to participate. So a reasonable goal would be to get them to talk more positively about the program. This can be done through good one-on-one conversations. But how do you keep that conversation positive? Well, that's where the pencil comes in. Let's say you're having a conversation with a student named Robert. You have your pencil with you. And one of your first questions for Robert is this. The eraser end of this pencil represents 0. And the tip of the pencil represents 100. 0 means you hate the program so much you'd rather be at the dentist's office every day. And the tip of the pencil means you love it so much that you'd rather go here than Disney World. Tell me, on this scale from 0 to 100, show me on the pencil about how much you like coming to the after-school program. And Robert will pick a number. Let's say he'll say about 40. That's about this far. Interesting, you say. Well, this is great. Robert, can you tell me all the stuff that goes from 0 to 40? What's all the things that are packed in there that make you like after-school program? What you're doing here are two important things. You're acknowledging exactly how he feels about the program. It's only at 40%. 40% he likes, 60% he doesn't. But you are going to make the conversation about that 40%. You see, students are like anyone. They want to have their voice and their opinion validated. And so by demonstrating that you understand exactly where they're coming from, you've given them that validation. So now they feel more comfortable about just talking about the positive things. So Robert says, well, I like the snack. I like hanging out with my friends. Sometimes the homework help is interesting. Hey, this is all great stuff. Let's expand. Tell me more about homework help. Tell me about a time that you did well in school because you got help with your homework. Hey, he's going to tell a story about how he got help with his math and then he aced the test the next day. And you ask him how he felt about that. Wasn't that great? Yeah. What's happening here is all that positive talk is growing his intrinsic motivation to come to after school. The more he says it, the more he feels it. And the more he feels it, the more he's going to want to continue to act on that. That's how you build intrinsic motivation. But an important part of this too is working together as a team. And so towards the end of the conversation, you might want to bring up the idea that it's at 40, but we could work together to make it higher. So you say, hey, Robert, what can we do to make this 40 bigger? What can we do to make it 45 or 50? How can we work together? At this point, Robert is in a pretty positive mindset and probably willing to work with you to come up with a joint solution to get him engaged more. Something workable, something maybe even educational, something that will benefit the both of you. Working as a team to build engagement is incredibly important because it can't just be on the teacher. It can't just be on the staff. We can do a lot of stuff to increase engagement, but ultimately it's going to come down to the students being willing to engage themselves.
Okay, so with that, the final note that I want to make on that is that this is sort of a philosophical note, but I feel that we spend too much time trying to attack the negative problem. If a student is having difficulty with somewhere, we want to talk with the student about what's bad and try to fix it that way. Our intentions are good, but we always try to do it in that direction. And instead, we could take it from a completely different angle, find out what's good and just how to make that bigger. And essentially, you can see incremental improvement with your students where you're seeing more good stuff and it's starting to push out some of the negative behaviors. It's a slow, long relationship building process, to get a student, let's say, from 40% to 80%. However, it is a process. You see some improvement on day one, and you can actually have room for continued growth. And I find this works with students that are already very engaged in programs and students that are very, very much. You're never going to turn a student completely around with this, but you're never going to turn a student completely around with anything. Instead, this is a slow, steady process to see real change, real lasting change in a child. And the reason why we advocate it so much is that it lasts past you, your relationship, your time in the program, especially if you're working on the really big things like a hard worker. If you have instilled in a child the idea that they're a hard worker, that is their purpose is to achieve, that's going to stay with them forever. And that is a benefit, I feel like, that cannot be measured. And so with that, I just have a couple final notes about this. The main thing that I will say is that you need to practice. Practice feels awkward at first, especially all the reflective listening, or just sort of this way of having to ask open questions and really think about sort of what you're saying. But practice, especially with the pencil thing, and start with the easy students. Start with the ones that you know you're going to have kind of a positive conversation with to start. You'll be kind of surprised what you'll learn about your students, and they'll often have good ideas about, even if they're at 90%, how to expand it, or what they actually like, what's actually in there that's good. Students, like anyone, actually love to complain and tell you it's bad. But when you put them on the spot and you say, well, we want to talk about the good things that are in this program, you'd be kind of surprised what they find valuable. So you get moved past the awkwardness. The more you do it, the more you feel comfortable with it. And that's essentially it. The more you do it, the more that it becomes sort of second nature, and you don't have to think about it as much and think so hard about it. But at first, it is difficult. At first, you feel like you have awkward pauses. You feel like you're trying to come up with the right question, or to how do I phrase this to make sure that we're not turning this into sort of a negative thing. But it's sort of just reprogramming ourselves to ask more positive questions and get more positive results. With that is the end of this webinar. Like I said, I tried to keep it short and just an overview. That MI goes into a lot of details and a lot of specific areas, especially with what you'd call resistance, which is to say students that really push back even the idea of conversation. There are ways to get around that. But those are kind of long and detailed and not quite right for a webinar sort of situation. But I hope that you got some information out of this, and I'd love more questions. If anybody has any more questions about how this works or anything like that.
Excellent. This is really good information. I think some of that resistance stuff, I can imagine a conversation like this with my new teen. It's, I don't know, maybe, those one answer questions that you get, like, how do you get past those? Because they're really giving you the hand up, but how do you get past those? And maybe that's for another conversation. I mean, that's a much deeper conversation, but
that is, but I mean, I'd like to say that is probably the biggest question that I get. Every talk that I do is what about that? And there are a lot of different ways to sort of get that around, but the key is the key to it is sort of persistence, like the kid who doesn't talk, because this is all about having a conversation. But when the kid doesn't say anything, how do you get anywhere, right? But the key is really persistence without being angry or punishing the kid for talking. Essentially, you still want to be a positive person in their life and show that you still really care about their opinion, even if they're not giving it to you. And then you just kind of hope that it comes out. You hope that it turns around. And then if you catch them on a good day, if you catch them at a good time when they're willing to talk, then maximize all that stuff that we're talking about today. You just pour that on. You keep that conversation going as long as you can. And sometimes, in the other end, the only time that we have conversations with the kids are when they're in trouble and they don't want to talk. And so just catching them when they're in a good mood, catching them at least on neutral grounds is a good way to avoid that. So there are some real basic things like that, but then even beyond that, there are, like in one of the courses that we sort of do is considered advanced motivational interviewing. And it is really sort of attacking the positive kids that are either don't want to talk at all or pretty aggressively trying to thwart anything that you're trying to do for them.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I would love to hear more of this. I'm curious to see what our participants think. I just wanted to, again, encourage anyone, if they'd like to ask a question, they can unmute themselves, or they can go ahead and put that in the chat box. And while we see if there's anyone who has that, I just wanted to remind everyone that this is recorded. And if you'd like to bring this back to your team or, revisit this conversation again, you will have that opportunity, and we will send that out after the webinar. Give us about a half an hour to put all of that stuff together. So do I see any questions? I'm going to unmute everyone really quick. So if you have a question, I'd love to hear them.
No question, but thank you for the great presentation.
Oh, sure, you're welcome.
Okay, can you guys hear me? You won't know because I just muted you all again. Hold on. I'm going to unmute Aaron at least.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, that concludes our webinar today. Thank you, Aaron, for helping us keep that within the hour we've allotted for this, and great content. I'm really excited to see what the response is. Please feel free to share that with us through the survey that we will be sending to you. And again, thank you so much to Aaron and Motivate Youth for sharing this knowledge. And we will call it a wrap.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This is great. I had a lot of fun, and thanks everyone for listening and tuning in. And give it a shot. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.